Hello everyone and welcome back to another average review. And we're just heading back to a standard, nice, regular Marvel Legends review with the Hasbro Marvel Legends House of X Wolverine. Now, before I get the review actually started, I'd like to give out two disclaimers. One, this video is gonna contain some very, very minor spoilers for Deadpool and Wolverine. Like, just spoilers for about, I don't know, the first 20 minutes of the movie. But if you want to go into the movie completely blind, then you might want to click off right now. I'd also like to mention that I got this figure loose, so he doesn't have the box or any of the accessories he came with. So I can't really show him off in person. With all that out of the way though, let's get to the sculpting and paintwork on this guy. Starting out, we can see that this guy relies heavily on reuse, specifically with the standard Marvel Legends Wolverine body, which I have no problems with. It's a great body for Wolverine, pretty much perfect. But the specific Wolverine body is the X-Force version of Wolverine. You can see with the flat arms and shoulders, along with the detailed, more realistic gloves and the big claws, and similarly realistic buckled boots. You know, it's not the classic design exactly, you know, with the fins coming out the side of the boots. It's a much more realistic and grounded take. But it's very appropriate to the costume of this era for Wolverine. Speaking of the costume, he's in a new version of Wolverine's classic brown and yellow costume, which is probably my favorite Wolverine costume. And hey, I do not mind the changes made to it here, since it's honestly not too different. It's just that instead of trunks, he has these yellow bits going down the side, which actually matches up pretty well with the yellow on the torso, so I like that. The boots are, you know, not as cool as the classic fins that come out, but hey, they're pretty good looking, and they're a different shade of brown from the actual brown of the legs, which is a nice touch. Speaking of the shade of brown, it's a very, very nice shade of brown. It's a bit darker and duller on camera, but it's a pretty good, pretty much perfect shade of brown for this version of Wolverine. The same goes for the yellow. It's a very mustardy shade of yellow, which I think matches really well with the brown on this costume. Let's also take a look at the belt. It's pretty much the same idea as the classic Wolverine belt, where it's just, you know, a standard belt with a buckle with an X on it, but it's a bit different. This time it's brown, it's got some nice leathery texturing, and the buckle is a circle with an X on it. I also really like how tight the paint on the yellow inside the X is. I mean, that just looks fantastic. One thing that isn't as fantastic as his arm hairs, they don't look too great, especially in comparison to the arm hairs on the X-Force Wolverine. Granted, they aren't the worst Wolverine arm hairs ever. I mean, there's some Wolverine figures that don't even have the arm hair painted on, which is pretty dumb, since, I mean, Wolverine's known for being a hairy guy. Moving up, though, his head is very nice. It's got pretty short fins, and the fins are actually brown instead of black, which I really like, since it, you know, matches with the actual torso on the costume. And it's got some realistic-looking seam lines running through, which is a pretty nice touch. I like how the eyes have been sculpted in. I don't know, they just look nice. But I think one of the nicest touches on this figure is the fact that he's got a smiling head sculpt. You know, smiling head sculpts on superhero figures are pretty rare in the grand scheme of things, so getting one on a character like Wolverine, who's known for being all grumpy, is an amazing touch, and it's really unique. I really like all the wrinkles on his face, and his smile has been painted pretty nicely. Overall, really great looking figure just standing around. But what makes this body even better is the articulation, which we'll be moving on to right now. Now, his head's on a disc hinge, so it can look up this far, which is pretty good for a character as short as Wolverine, and can look down even further. He's actually got a bit of tilt side to side, And, of course, his head can spin around since it's on a ball joint. He's got butterfly shoulders that move forward a good amount, and move backwards even better. I mean, just look at that. He's got shoulders that can spin around, and hinge, well, a little bit above 90 degrees. He's got bicep swivel, double jointed elbows with a pretty good bend, and hands that can spin around and hinge up or down. Moving down to the torso, he's got an ab crunch that can move forward and backwards, and a waist cut which allows him to spin around. A little limited by that belt, but if you move it, he gets some pretty good range in the torso. Now he's got ball joint hips that can kick up very high, that's pretty impressive. But less impressive is his split, but still pretty decent. He's got swivel at the thigh thanks to a thigh cut, double jointed knees, unfortunately no boot cut, which I felt like would have been pretty easy. I mean, you just place a cut right there and you can get some swivel. But he does have feet that can hinge backwards, forwards, and pivot side to side. Moving on to the figure comparisons, we're starting out with the standard comparisons for these reviews, the Marvel Legends Renew Your Vows, Spider-Man, and Spinneret. I'd like to mention that in the comics, Wolverine is around 5'3", so him being this short and stocky compared to other Marvel figures is a very nice touch. But Wolverine is a member of the X-Men, so here's him with his fellow X-Men members, starting off with the classic love triangle of Scott Summers Cyclops, James Howlett Wolverine, and Jean Grey, this one specifically being the Phoenix. Cyclops is Hasbro's Astonishing X-Men version, and Jean is the Toy Biz Marvel Legends Phoenix. Like I said, Wolverine nicely scales with Marvel Legends, and mixing the brown suit with the Phoenix does sort of remind me of the Chris Claremont and John Byrne run. Although, for two members of the X-Men that were introduced to the team alongside Wolverine in giant-size X-Men, we have Storm, specifically the retro card Black Suit Storm, and Colossus, specifically the Colossus from the 80th anniversary Colossus vs. Juggernaut 2-pack. And hey, with how big Colossus is, with enough patience and balance, you can get both these guys into a pretty good fastball special pose. For one of the few X-Men that's actually hairier than Wolverine, we have Beast, specifically being the retro card Grey Beast. Although, for two of the most important X-Men characters, we have Magneto, specifically the Age of Apocalypse Magneto, but with a haircut and a minor repaint, and Professor X. This is specifically the Fox movie Professor X that came in a 2-pack with the movie Magneto. Speaking of rivalries, though, we have Wolverine's greatest rival, Sabretooth. This is specifically the Diamond Select Toys Marvel Select version. Moving on to some other Marvel heroes, though, we have Captain America. This is specifically the Hasbro Marvel Legends 20th anniversary version of Cap. Iron Man. This is specifically the Walgreens exclusive Marvel Legends Silver Centurion Iron Man. I chose this one since, like Brown Suit Wolverine, it's a redesign of a Marvel hero that's largely associated with the 1980s. And moving back to Spider-Man from earlier, the retro-carded version of Spider-Man. I'd like to mention from here on out throughout the entire video, there's gonna be the minor spoilers for Deadpool and Wolverine that I mentioned earlier. Well, with that past us, here's the version of Deadpool from the Marvel Legends Deadpool Core box set, since it's the only real Deadpool I have. I do find it interesting how much this Wolverine resembles, at least in costume, the brief brown-suited Wolverine that we saw fight the Hulk during that big Wolverine montage near the beginning. Although, speaking of the Hulk, here's the Marvel Legends Endgame Professor Hulk Build-A-Fig, since it's the closest thing I have to the Hulk we briefly saw in that scene. Although for comic Hulks, here's the Marvel Legends 20th Anniversary Hulk, and the Toy Biz Marvel Legends Face-Off Hulk, which is my personal favorite. Here's Wolvie with the giant Marvel Universe Masterworks Sentinel. As is tradition, here's the House of X Wolverine with Hitmonkey and Goliath. Although, for one final comparison, here's the House of X brown suit Wolverine with my custom brown suit Wolverine that I made from the Bone Breakaway version. And yeah, of course, the House of X version is better since it's an official figure. Not just a custom I made with a bit of acetone to remove the blue parts and some random brown and red paint I had lying around. That isn't to say I think mine looks horrible. It doesn't look good on camera. It looks a bit better in person, but yeah, no contest. House of X, way better. Now, I don't actually have the accessories for this guy, but you know who does? Google does. The only accessory he comes with, though, is this alternate, more stoic Wolverine head that actually has a bit of gray, hairs at the bottom of his chin. It would have been nice if I had that head so that I can have a more stoic Wolverine, but if I were to choose between this smiling head or the more stoic head, I'd definitely choose the smiling head, since it's a much more unique look for Wolverine. Now, I really love this figure. It's a great version of brown suit Wolverine, but with some more modern touches. What I don't like is the aftermarket prices on this guy. Upwards of $45 for this brown suit Wolverine. Now, why is that? Well, first of all, it's a classic Wolverine figure. Those are always gonna be expensive and super desired. But I feel like the Deadpool and Wolverine movie is a bit of a factor here. Now, not the biggest factor, but still a factor nonetheless. Like I said earlier, this is really similar to the brown suit Wolverine that briefly appeared during that Wolverine montage early in the movie. So I feel like, with that in mind, some people might want this figure even more since it's so similar to that version of Wolverine. Now, granted, I didn't pay the average secondary market prices for this guy. I paid $10 at a local collectible shop. In that regards, this figure was more than worth it. This Wolverine might just be one of the best Legends versions of Wolverine. In my opinion, he's probably the best brown-suited version, just based off of the color scheme. I feel like the other Legends brown suit Wolverines don't get the color scheme exactly right. But this guy does it just fine. And hey, the modern touches does make this guy look unique compared to a lot of other comic Wolvies. And that's not even mentioning the smiling head sculpt. But there are always gonna be negatives for this guy. For me, it's two things. The arm hairs, since they just look like a bunch of squiggles, and also the secondary market prices, but those aren't as much of a factor to me since I didn't pay those prices for this guy. Still though, this is a great Legends Wolverine, and so I'm gonna give him a 9 out of 10. He is the best at what he does, and what he does is be a great Legends figure. If you've made it this far to the video, well, have a great day, 'cause you deserve it. Bye-bye.